All right, we are rolling now.
Ooh.
I'm going to count us down. 3, 2.
You're listening to Missing Out with Lex Michael and Tauri J. Let's start the show.
Hey guys, welcome back to Missing Out. I'm Tauri J.
I'm Lex Michael.
And we're joined by special guest, return 35-year-old white man,
Yeah, you remember.
Matt Smith.
Yes, that's me. I'm 36 now.
Yeah. Oh, congratulations.
Happy
not white.
belated.
Thank you.
All right, so Matt, give us the pitch. What are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about virtual cinematography, which sounds fancy, but it's not. And this is why it's important, because it's been happening and it's continuing to happen in every movie you've ever seen since like 2003.
Okay, interesting. And for those who don't know,
lie. That's an exaggeration.
No, I don't care.
That's the pitch. Yeah.
For those who don't know what virtual cinematography is that you go into a computer and then you take a camera into your computer, like Virtuosity or The Matrix, and then this is a bit. I'm doing a bit.
It's a bit, but you're kind of right. It's funny you mentioned The Matrix. So virtual cinematography does encompass a very wide range of techniques, and that's kind of why it's really fuzzy at the moment.
Yeah.
Mentioning The Matrix, though, one of the first things that you could consider like virtual cinematography in the contemporary era was the bullet time effect.
Which everybody knows that scene, right? Where he's going backwards, dodging the bullets in slow motion. But I feel like a lot of people don't realize how that was achieved, right? And it's just cameras in a big 360.
It was like 270 degrees of cameras, and it was just a bunch of small cameras that were all shooting like 8 frames a second. They're using DSLRs at that point. Which, you have to remember, this was, 98 was when
they were shooting it. I think it came out in 99.
When they were shooting it. So, like, a camera to shoot 8 frames a second in a digital file of a certain resolution back then was already sort of high-end.
Right.
And they were using, like, dozens of them. And then stitching them together in the same way that now when you take a panorama on your phone, like your iPhone, that's the exact same technique. People don't realize, like, your phone, when you go across the Grand Canyon, it's not making a video, it's taking like a bunch of photos as you pan across. And then that's why you hit the wait 30 seconds, is because it's processing that and stitching it together. Mm-hmm. That shows how far technology has come.
For sure.
Yeah.
So essentially then, if I have a smartphone, I can dodge bullets.
Yeah. That's how that works.
Pretty much, yeah.
This is good. I'm going to put this theory to the test. And I'm going to do it with 270 degrees of cameras.
Oh, man. I mean, I feel like even just kind of taking a step back before we even get to like taking the concept of the panoramas and the bullet time, like for people who aren't super technically inclined, like you have to realize that all movies, and I'm making a big quotation marks, are essentially just a series of individual pictures that play in order, and your brain interprets it as moving.
Right. 24 frames per second gives that lifelike quality to it. Do you know why? I just learned this. Somehow I'd never known this before, just recently. Do you know why movies are called flicks?
Why?
So when they were originally projected, they were projected at a lower frame rate, which I think was something like 16 frames per second, which created this sort of flickering image effect. And that's why they're called that. Still,
wow.
Somehow missed that till a second ago.
That's interesting.
Flicks.
Yeah. Now, anytime I hear flicks, I just think it should be preceded by porno.
Or net.
Yeah.
Or net.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys are. What is that? Is that new?
What is porno flicks? Oh, it's not a website. You're just talking.
Honestly,
it's an expression. I get it.
A website like Pornhub, though, really set the precedent for how a website like Netflix could exist in the internet like infrastructure. But that's
for sure.
Well, yeah,
porn traditionally leads the way technologically as far as direct-to-consumer home media.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember if we were talking about that online or offline, but we were talking about how essentially a lot of, and even a bunch of my tech friends will say that like most of the new technology that happens with like streaming or internet technology first goes through porn, and then everyone adopts it from there. It's almost like the two main sources for innovation are the military and pornography.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's why
Sex and violence. I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
that's ultimately why Blu-ray won that format war.
Yeah.
That's why there's no more HD DVD, because porn ultimately sided with Blu-ray. Mm-hmm. So thanks, porn.
Bro, if you're trying to get into some new ventures, just start with porn. It's easier than the military. They have like loops and checks and balances. They have like gatekeeping.
Porn
you know what I'm saying?
Openly welcoming the trans community.
Hell yeah. But yeah, so wrapping this back around, like,
what are we talking about?
So like essentially starting from the initial like 16 frames, someone cranking a wheel in order to make the film itself go. Like we've moved beyond that to having like digital film, and then from there we've even gone so far as to like not even needing a physical camera person, in that like we
and that is actually fairly recent.
Yeah.
And you started to see techniques. So visual effects, obviously, is a huge part of filmmaking today. And that's where you first started to see the idea of, creating a virtual camera.
Yeah.
But everything, even up until like the early 2010s in that scope, was pretty rigid, and it felt like animation. It felt like Pixar's early camera movement. If you look at like Toy Story and like a lot of Pixar's early films, like everything was very still.
Yeah.
Or like very simple pans and dollies. And that's because on an artistic level, you had a lot of animators trying to cinematically create something.
Yeah.
And that language of emotional lighting and creative lighting didn't necessarily transfer over directly from cinematographers.
Yeah.
But even on a technological level, it's like computers in the early 90s, late 90s, and even the early 2000s weren't able, they gradually got better, but they weren't able to process a virtual camera that's moving in a three-dimensional space the way a real camera can move in a three-dimensional space.
Right.
I could pick up a camera and turn it a million times in circles and flip it all over the place, and that's just a crazy handheld move in a fight scene for me.
Yeah.
To do that in animation is like tons of rendering problems, but we're living in the future now, so that is all changing. And the same things really, video games are what drove a lot of that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because video games over the last like few decades have become a lot more cinematic. Like my roommate and I were discussing, because she only plays like linear platformers, and I have just been recently playing a game that has bumped up its engine to the Unreal Engine. Which, if you haven't played anything on the Unreal Engine, it's amazing.
Can you rattle off a couple examples?
Kingdom Hearts 3.
Yes, I
Gears of War.
Gears of
God
War.
of War.
Yes.
Oh, God of War. Yeah, I've played that one. It's great.
Which I think to me was my first like ultra cinematic, like large scale game, was God of War 1. Which was like revolutionary even before we had like the Unreal Engine and like these really high performing consoles. Like that was the first thing that essentially married cinematic storytelling with gameplay. And so like now that area is getting a lot more cinematic, we can kind of take some of that technology and apply it to actual like movie storytelling and things of that sort.
Exactly. And like, I mean, if you look at like motion capture has been in the video game industry for a long time. And it's just now starting, I'm not going to say trickle over into the film industry, but be used in the film industry on a level that feels cinematic. And that was always sort of, there was a gatekeeping element to the visual effects communities in film and the production communities, the physical production communities, camera departments, design departments, where like they were like, yeah, visual effects, you can do a bunch of stuff, but none of it ever feels real. It doesn't look good. It's, you know, you only do it because to do it any other way would truly be physically impossible or extremely expensive. What's changed now is like things aren't necessarily extremely expensive anymore. They're still just physically impossible. When you look at something like the Avengers movies and things like that, and granted, I mean, those are definitely multi-million-dollar movies, but a lot of those multi-million dollars isn't necessarily the actual visual effects budgets and what's really like that's going into actors, you know, paying that ensemble cast, and the marketing campaigns for these kind of films. So something like, you guys remember the Final Fantasy movie that came out?
Yes.
That was not a good movie, but it was definitely ahead of its time in exploring that motion capture photorealistic idea of filmmaking,
right?
Or filmmaking in that manner. And they went similar to the movie The Beowulf that came out.
Zemeckis with Ray Winstone.
They went full CGI in like their characters' environments. They motion captured a lot of real people and then photorealized them. And that, for the technology then, there was still a bit of a gap. And we spoke before the podcast started about the Uncanny Valley.
Yeah.
Where, for anyone who doesn't know what the Uncanny Valley is, it's more so a term than a specific thing. But it's the idea that when you're looking at something that is artificially created, but is supposed to appear real, if you imagine like a bell curve or something, like there's a point where things can be more detail and more realistic looking to a point, and it drops into the Uncanny Valley where there's just, it looks completely real except for something, and that something doesn't sit well with people.
Right. Normally it's something that is meant to look human specifically, right? And it's something, it can look totally like a person, but something is just a little bit off. Whereas if you've got something like, I don't know, like Thanos in Infinity War, right? Like that, there are shots where he looks incredibly photorealistic. Clearly that's a cartoon, but he's only sort of human. He's a big purple alien guy, so that doesn't necessarily apply there.
Right.
Exactly, yeah. And that is why I think you're seeing a lot of this early virtual cinematography stuff starting in movies like The Jungle Book and The Lion King, where they're not attempting to make photoreal animals. Like I was listening to an interview with Andy Serkis about the Mowgli Netflix movie that he just did, and they were using a lot of sort of virtual cinematography tools where, for anyone to get an idea of like what this tool means practically, imagine making The Jungle Book. Everyone kind of knows that story, I feel like. Making The Jungle Book, and obviously the kid's not talking to a real panther. So imagine there's a real camera shooting this real kid in front of a real blue screen. And then on top of that camera is like an iPad or some other device with a display that's showing that real kid, blue screen's keyed out, and there's like a rough animated jungle behind him with full sunlighting and reflections and a wireframe or even more detailed panther next to this kid. And the actor who's playing that panther is also there on the set in a full suit with a bunch of dots on his face, following every facial expression he makes. And in that movie specifically, like, they even went as far as like everyone was on all fours. So if they arched their back a certain way, that data could be applied to the panther model.
Yeah.
And what you get is, you don't get a panther that moves and acts like an actual panther, but you get a panther that has visual expressions that feel like what our brains know as human visual expressions, facial expressions.
I want to know if the Blu-ray contains any footage of Ben Kingsley on all fours with mocap dots all over him, because if so, I will buy that today.
Dude, there's a I'll send you a link. It's not for that movie, but I think when he played Sauron, did he play Sauron, like some evil dragon?
Oh, are you
in
thinking of Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yeah. Benedict Cumberbatch.
Smog.
Yeah, he played Smog. There's a video of him playing Smog, and it's literally it's him on his
all fours,
belly,
yeah.
like rolling around.
Yes, I've seen little bits of mocap stuff behind the scenes, like making Marvel movies and whatnot. Mocap, by the way, like we're kind of, if you are listening and you don't know what mocap is, it is like if you've seen actors with the little dots all over them, that's mocap. So basically, those is so you can
motion capture, which probably helps.
Yeah, and every little dot, right, is just a point that they can use for reference, so that later when you're mapping the digital effect onto the actor, you're still retaining that performance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Except now we're at a point where things are real time, or close to real time. So, and this goes back to video games again, who really have been the ones driving this technology. The latest God of War was lauded for its cinematic praise and the fact that it had no cuts between its gameplay and its cinematic cut sequences.
Yeah.
While retaining like the same level of graphics, which anyone who's played video games through the 2000s remembers. You would see these cool sequences, and then you go to play the game, and it's like 8-bit. You're like, what the fuck's going on?
Right. And then you also have this gap where you have to sit there waiting for it to
wait
load.
for it to load. So none of that was in this game, and the way that works is they were able to render everything, including the gameplay itself, and transitioning to what were those cinematic sequences as real time. And there was still a lot of post-processing that happened once they captured all this stuff, but capturing it in real time was the big key. So a scene of that thing, for example, where like there's a scene in the game where Kratos and this little kid that he's chaperoning are fighting a Cyclops. And there's a behind-the-scenes video of the creation of that scene where it's literally 3 people in capture suits and the head cinematic designer of that game, whose name is Tauri something. But he was just to be involved in that whole process, and he's there with an iPad, holding it as if it's a real camera, viewing it as if it's a real camera, moving around these humans in these suits, but the way he's framing, and this is where it truly becomes virtual cinematography, he's framing someone who represents a 16-foot tall Cyclops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the relationships between people's physical... So the Cyclops might be standing directly over Kratos in this virtual scene, but the 2 actors could be 20 feet away. So everyone's brain is rewired now. Actors are acting differently in these spaces.
Yeah.
They're exaggerating moves or like reaching out to someone who in reality is 20 feet away and reacting to something 20 feet away, but knowing that in the virtual space they're 2 feet away. Mm-hmm. And it's in that kind of case, and up until even all the way, something very similar to those sort of techniques were used in Disney's Jungle Book movie.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're bringing the virtual world, but you're looking at it through the prism of the real world, if that makes sense, the physical world. The latest the latest Lion King movie has sort of changed that. It's very under wraps what is going on that set, but you can glean a lot if you listen to the visual effects supervisor, Rob Legato.
Mm-hmm.
He did the Jungle Book. He was on Avatar. He's been really a huge proponent in this behind the scenes for a very long time. And you can glean enough from his interviews and just looking into that. What they did was combine all those techniques with things that are advancing in VR, and you have something similar to the false world, or not the false, but the fictional world that was in Ready Player One. I forget the name of it.
The Oasis.
The Oasis, where the director, the DP, the production designer, the talent are all putting on suits and headsets, and then they're in Africa. And Donald Glover is in a suit and a headset in the real world, but he is appearing as some fun, like not this final render of Simba, but like a wire-framed, roughly modeled lion talking with Beyonce, and like the DP and the director are able to all. So it really is a virtual set and virtual filmmaking at that point. But you're able what's interesting is you're doing all that to enable techniques and thought processes from traditional and practical filmmaking.
Yeah, it's interesting. So basically, they're marrying like these digital virtual environments with augmented reality in order to essentially kind of circle back around to using traditional cinematography methods, because before they had to use like tennis balls, and they're like, pretend this tennis ball is your co-star, and then like the actor has to imagine what it's like, which, you know, always ends up in varying degrees of success. Like sometimes you can kind of tell that the actor is disengaged because they are essentially in a blue room acting off of a tennis ball, and you know, it takes a lot of focus and determination to do a legit scene with that level of disconnection from what your material is. But now they can actually be in the as much as possible in the environment and kind of play off of that and be able to do these scenes relatively like a play. Like the play environment is just in the virtual headset or the augmented reality, which essentially allows us to get back to a place where we can do more advanced cinematography and more advanced shots using this technology.
Yeah,
which is really interesting. As a cinematographer, does this, or like a DP, does that excite you, or how does this make you feel?
So I have a mixed bag of feelings about it. Overall, it excites me. Overall, it makes me think that clearly, like, it makes the opportunities within storytelling so much more massive.
Yeah.
And I am just sort of a creative technologist in general. I enjoy keeping up on what the latest technological trends are and what they can do, and thinking about what they will continue to do in the future. And like, I sort of eschewed things like VR initially. I don't like putting on headsets and goggles and stuff, but I understand the power of them, and I find that to be very interesting. And when I say I don't like to like be in them for too long. Like I'd like to go into VR worlds and like mess around with VR gaming and stuff like that. And I've watched a lot of VR films, and it's all really cool, but I can only stand like an hour of it personally. Yeah. I think I'm old in that sense. For real. And like, you have kids now who are born literally staring at screens, and it's going to become natural for them to be in headsets or to look at what we think are not real and virtual environments as the standard and the default environment to live and breathe and be in. And that is interesting to me. That's really cool to me. I think the same way there's like people still shoot film, it's like people are still going to make normal movies. Right. Not every film also is going to call for like building a VR world and launching into a headset. Right. You know, that's not how, like, The Favorite wouldn't have made any sense like that. Right. You know, Green Book isn't going to be
they're all lions and whatnot. Yeah. No, my fear about going longer than an hour in one of those headsets is I might decide I'm not coming back. I'm just staying here. This is better. The world is burning down, but in this headset, I can be free. I remember at one point, you were showing me a VR thing at one point, and I put the headset on, and I guess the hub was just this room. So the room was a nice place, like, and you could see chairs, and you could look all around. You could see like sliding glass doors. You could see outside, but you can't really walk around. You can't really interact with anything in that room. You're just in that room looking around. And I swear to you, I was like, this is better. This is better than the real world. Why do I ever have to leave this room? Who's gonna make me? If I decide I'm gonna stay here, who's gonna make me leave the room? That would be my fear. The more developed this all becomes, the more you're able to interact. Eventually, we all, if we want them, probably will have the suits and stuff from Ready Player One, so that we feel everything. Mm-hmm. We have a tactile experience on top of the visual experience. At a certain point, just hook a thing to my arm so that I get nutrition. Just put a little bag on me right here so I don't have to get up, and I'm staying. I'm staying in there.
It begins to beg the question, what is reality? Mm-hmm. You know, if reality is defined by what we perceive sensatorily, through our senses.
Yeah.
If we can create a technology that tricks essentially those senses or just satisfies them, then is that not technically a second form of reality?
Right. At a certain point, too, it could become the default reality. Like, yeah, I mean, you're familiar with simulation theory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea that on a long enough timeline, there will be a simulation that is so advanced as to be utterly indistinguishable from our reality. And the theory further posits that if that's possible, it has already happened, and we're living in a simulation.
Yeah, we're living in it.
Yeah. I mean, or kind of getting what you, or kind of expanding on what you were getting at, like it becomes kind of a surrogate situation, like the movie Surrogates with Bruce Willis, where everyone has their ideal bodies, which are basically robots, and everyone's in these little pods. And so now Bruce Willis can have hair, which is his ideal form. So like,
Bruce Willis's ideal form is John McClane.
right. Even more hair. Anyway, he's just a big ball of hair.
A cousin it from the Adams.
So like a
Yeah. So like we could essentially theoretically get to that place where we are all living in these little boxes and experiencing the world through these like machines or something to that effect. I mean, kind of circling back to the idea of using it cinematographically. Yeah.
I'll take it.
I mean, yeah, I think that kind of like what you were saying, it would be genre specific. Like, I think that like there are specific genres that really cater towards it, like sci-fi or horror or thriller or even just like supernatural.
Yeah.
Those kind of things, I think, very much are kind of already require a leap of like, or a pause in, what is the word I'm looking for?
Suspension
of
carrots.
disbelief.
No,
Thank you.
all right.
Carrots.
Yeah.
A suspension of but so then having these immersive environments allows you to tell richer stories using that piece. But if it is just like, you know, The Favorite or something that is very human and grounded, I don't know if it would necessarily be the best use of it. Like, you're like, all right, cool, now you're in Victorian English,
and that takes me back to what I was saying is virtual cinematography is still, that is sort of the future forward upper echelon, like this is what its absolute most powerful forms can be and what we can do. There's also the idea that you're on something like The Favorite, and you're shooting in a location that's set up like a 16th century castle or whatever, but outside is a goddamn skyscraper. And everyone knows now that background environments and things like that are totally blue screen to key screen and all of that. But some tools now, and it's really this idea of real-time rendering that over the past 2 or 3 years it was pushed through game engines like Unreal, predominantly Unreal, where now on set it's not like, oh, there's just a big green screen there and we know we're going to put something. Now it's like there's a green screen there, but we're able to live key it and feed in something else, and we can also be working on the lighting of that background plate. And oh, maybe that building doesn't look as good, let's put up something else that looks like this, and oh, can we add like a reflection off of that? Now that there's like a reflection that can motivate an actual piece of real lighting on our actress. Right. And like these are all real-time like pre-visual stuff that used to be done just like in previs for imagining what an insane special effects sequence would look like on set, for having something to be like, okay, this is right, this is how we can maybe key it later, is now all real-time, where on set you can say, oh, what would happen if we changed the background to do this, or what would happen if we flipped that on its side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were talking about being scared that you'll never leave. Here's my fear.
Okay.
Because of how like technologies start to meld over time. So I remember when they were first talking about the Unreal Engine, back when I think it was Force Unleashed was getting started. and how they were essentially fabricating all of these realistic backgrounds, and they were getting to a point and using like C-3PO as a way of showing that like you don't necessarily need actors to do things anymore, because we could program C-3PO to do all of these things in these virtual environments. And so now that was, I want to say, like 15 years ago. And so at this point, we are getting to the place where we can not only do that, but we have we're developing robot stunt people. We also have the technology to you load up someone's footage and their face and their voices, and you can fabricate them saying different things. And so now we essentially have these virtual environments with the ability to place a robot or like a fake body into a situation, and then you can also paint someone's face on top of that thing. Like it's getting to a place where we're removing all of these aspects, like some of them for the better, like stunt people, hell yeah. But like we're getting to a place where we can essentially create these alternate worlds and these alternate environments that like can be used for nefarious means, which like is the most terrifying thing for me.
Yes, there's very much a light side and a dark side to these technological developments, right? On the light side, you talk about virtual cinematography as a way. Maybe the favorite doesn't necessitate an approach like that, but I would imagine the whole experience would be drastically different if you feel like you are in the room with these characters while things are going on. It's how you talk about like genre stuff could benefit from it immensely. I know Robert Englund, who plays Freddy Krueger, just did a VR horror project with, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of his name, but Alexandre Aja, the guy who did...
Inarito?
No, not him.
Oh.
He's a horror director.
Oh, okay.
But they just did a horror VR project together, and I can't imagine what that experience would be like. Experiencing a horror movie well constructed as somebody who's actually in the room while this is all happening. So all of that stuff is really, really exciting. But then you consider, Tauri, what you were just talking about, and how we're getting to the point where somebody could take your likeness and map it onto somebody else, or your likeness could just exist independently of being mapped onto somebody else, and your likeness could be used for just about any dang thing somebody wants to use it for. This type of thing is already porn. Porn is leading the way on this. If you search, yes. One more time.
Deep fakes.
Deep fakes.
Yes.
So deep fakes, you gotta rummage around on some of the seedier parts of the internet, but essentially the premise behind deep fakes is usually it's a celebrity. They take their face and map it on to people who were filmed having sex, and at a certain point, these will progress to where they are indistinguishable.
They're pretty dang good
like,
so far.
Yeah, you won't see the seam.
Like you have deep fakes, but it's like Benjamin Button. Remember The Curious Case of Benjamin Button?
Yeah.
That was deep fake technology before it was something that, maybe not your average, but that someone who, and that is what's scary about technology, is how it trickles down and how it advances so rapidly, where that same technique on $1 million film was, high safeguarded, super crazy stuff, is now like there's 12-year-old kids who have gaming computers and they can pull that off if they have the patience and the dedication to just learn the techniques.
Right. And consider the fact that we are less than 100 years removed from, say, like the Lumiere brothers going, wait a minute, we can take these moving pictures and project them onto a big screen.
Yeah.
Less than 100 years have elapsed between then and now. So this shit is developing rapidly and exponentially.
Right. One could say the first deep fake was Nymphomaniac, which we talked about on this show, which like they actually developed the technology to like map these people's faces onto these porn stars. So you could imagine what it's like having sex with Shia LaBeouf. That was the sole purpose for it, right?
It was
the only reason the movie was made.
Of course.
Yeah. Yes, they did not allow him to title it Shia LaBeouf Sex Simulator.
But that's what it's called in Japan. But I had a silver lining and I just lost it thinking about Shia LaBeouf's dick.
But yeah, so we are rapidly coming up to a point in time where your face can just be thrown out there and you could be depicted as doing things very realistically, very believably that you would not do, saying things you would not say. Yeah. And how do you put that genie back in the bottle, especially once that technology becomes more and more and more consumer accessible?
I mean, I really don't think you do, to be honest. I think, and that's why when I first brought this topic up, I was like, I want to talk about virtual cinematography and what it means for like the movies we're watching now. Like, yeah, Lion King, this shit's gonna be, you're gonna cry so much watching Lion King. You're gonna cry so much. That shit's gonna look so real. That real looking ass lion is gonna die. And you're gonna be so sad.
You're gonna see the hoof marks in his ribs.
Exactly. Like, that shit's gonna be so sad. But thinking forward to like, okay, 2035. Where's technology going to be and how is it going to have changed our lives? Because like clearly Earth is changing. Mm-hmm. Earth is dying. I am a little conspiratorial, and I always find it interesting how military technology trickles down to consumer technology and is also displayed in cinema in a way where you'll be like, oh man, that crazy like weapon that we saw in a movie in 1980 is like a real weapon now, or like that insane piece of technology that was in Total Recall is called the Amazon Alexa. Like,
right.
What is interesting to me is how much films now are pushing the idea that we gotta get the fuck out of here and go to space, or motherfuckers are gonna start living underwater, or we're gonna like upload our consciousness to places, or we're gonna like shrink ourselves. And I'm not saying all of this is going to happen, but it does make me wonder if this is an interesting, whether it's conscious or not, Illuminati or not, if there's like a primer period before a massive technological change to how humans survive on this planet. And even those same virtual cinematography tools that are used to make cool movies right now are absolutely being used by military and industrial resources to, say, underwater welders, for example, are now being trained in virtual environments controlling robotic humanoids through the motion capture of a real welder. So underwater welders are no longer having to go underwater. They still have to learn. It's interesting, they still have to learn all the techniques as if they were, otherwise things will still explode and that robot will die.
Yeah.
But there's an element of danger removed if you can send a machine down there to physically be present for a job that dangerous. And that's one side where it's a huge positive.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, now think about that in like a military complex, military context. Like, oh, okay, we already have it with drone strikes where you read about the guys who were totally dissociated from dropping bombs through a screen.
Right, playing it like a video game.
Yeah.
So I think that this kind of stuff is going to change us. I don't know how yet. I think it's going to start with how our smart home concepts are the start, where everything is interconnected.
Yeah.
To begin with, the whole 5G network, when it is in true fruition, is going to really start to mean a lot of real time data exchange on things, where you could actually at that point start having sensors in your body that can communicate and track everything that's happening in your body to a cloud that is affecting some other driver in a big data link, data web link. So that's what scares, like similar fears that you have. It's just like, I don't know if I'm scared. I'm just sort of, I wonder if this is going to be a positive revolution, or if it's going to be a revolution that, because it's based on technology, and we all know, technology trickles down from the wealthy to the poor.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if there's going to be a cutoff to like, how, if we become dependent on these technologies, if you can't keep up with them, if you can't be affording to buy the latest and greatest and always have the latest thing, how people are going to continue to survive in that era.
I mean, we're already seeing it now, to a degree, right, everybody essentially needs to own a smartphone. Or for all intents and purposes, you can't work.
Yeah.
But we're already pretty dependent on the technology that we have. And yeah, it's only going to become more and more and more and more the truth. And we're not, on top of that, I don't think anybody's really actively tracking how the minds of kids are developing when you put an iPad in their hand as soon as they can form conscious thought.
No.
You know, so we're going to be looking at, you know, we'll be in our 60s, 70s, and we'll be looking at young people whose minds might be operating in a completely different way than ours would have because they developed completely differently.
Absolutely.
Because the sensory input constantly, and who is monitoring some of the weird shit that kids are watching? Kids are intended to be the audience of some really weird shit on YouTube.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you might be watching something that's fairly innocuous, and then for whatever reason, the algorithm decides you may also like this weird, like, hyper alt-right TED Talk type thing. So we don't know. People aren't really... I don't know of any real concrete studies that have been done on a mass scale.
Well, I don't think there's been enough time. If you think about the iPhone, like, there were smartphones, sure, you had Blackberries and shit, but, like, the iPhone came out, 2008, 2009? That's a decade ago. That's 10 years. Like, those kids we want to be tracking and studying are 10.
Yeah.
Like, there isn't anything to track and study yet. And you're right. I'm going to be looking back on this, at this world, on this conversation, thinking about what I was right and wrong about. Like, that's the best I'll be able to do, because we will be... That's why I say I feel old already, because it's like we are of a different ilk, but we're not gonna know how different yet. Especially us specifically, we're in a age group and age range where we were the last kids who went outside. Mm-hmm. You know, like we remember what it was like to have a home. I remember what it was like to have like a home phone and not really have cell phones.
Answering machine
like,
with tapes.
I remember getting my first computer and like listening to the dial-up and like seeing all of this progress to where we are now. Mm-hmm. But that said, I'm already sort of out of the loop on some of the most cutting-edge technologies, or just, like I said, with VR, like I just don't enjoy it the way someone who is born into that being a prominent technology is going to grow with it and love it. Right. And be so well versed in it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the biggest and so far the closest studies that we have to what you guys are talking about are how it's affecting people socially, and that like a lot of these kids who have access to this technology are only really experiencing the world through their phones, and the only way that the only reason that they do things is to be more performative, to show other people that they are doing it, and it creates this like isolation in that you have so much access to the world, but you're also like 100 steps removed from it because you are experiencing it through this window. Not to sound like the old person that I am, but like that's what we were missing, in that like we had to go outside. Like our parents were like, hey, we hate you, go outside.
You're
and
the
so
biggest mistake we ever made.
Right.
Go outside.
And so like it wasn't even that like we made the conscious choice to be like, you know what, I'm gonna go outside. It's just like that's what we had to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But now like there are 100 million different ways for kids to entertain themselves, and so they have more choice. But at the same time, like there's no dearth of things for them to consume, and so like that is essentially like what their social society is built around.
Yeah, this is sort of endless consumption.
Yeah, like I was just thinking about the fact that we were of a generation where, like when I was younger, when I was growing up, if I didn't happen to catch a movie while it was playing on TV, you literally, if you wanted to watch it on your own time, you had to leave your house, go to a store, get a physical copy, often a VHS tape, go home, watch it, and then leave your home again to bring it back.
Yeah.
That just seems so absurd now. Like, I imagine you would explain this to a kid now.
Yeah.
And the kid would be like, what the fuck was wrong with you guys? Why?
Yeah. I mean, well, think about the generation before us who had, if they missed a movie in theaters, They might have just missed it.
Right.
Like you know.
Or if you missed an episode of TV, like if you didn't catch a rerun of it, that's it. You may never see the thing.
You may never see it.
No, it's nuts. My dad is 70. He's about to turn 76 next month. And we've talked about how when he was a little kid, they were just really starting to roll out TVs for like mass purchase. And they would literally sit there and watch what was called the test patent. And there were about 3 shows that existed. Wow. So he still remembers that. You know, like it really is like, obviously he's a little bit old. Like he had me a little bit later than I think a lot of fathers have their kids, but he still remembers. He is of a generation. There are people alive now that are alive, kicking and healthy that were there when the first TVs hit people's homes. This shit moves fast. It's scary.
Yeah. I mean, circling it back to more positive things. I think that like, cause you sent us an interview with the guy who did Jungle Book and Lion King, and he was talking about how I guess when he was doing Jungle Book, it was like they were just trying a bunch of different things and it was new. And you also sent us this thing about how like this guy who basically combined an iPad, a PS3, and the controllers to make his own rig, which I think is really cool because it essentially allows
that guy ended up working as a major production supervisor on on the Lion King.
Oh, really?
Later, a lot of what he did and like sort of jerry rigged together, and what Rob Legato was doing on a higher end level, were synthesized to create like the version 2.0 of like both of their ideas together. Yeah,
that's awesome. Because like one thing that I think really gets people started in creative fields like movie making and things of that sort is essentially, you know, you always hear the story about people being like, yeah, and I got my first like 8mm camera from my dad, and I just started making films like that. And now, like, essentially, if you are a kid sitting at home and you have an iPad, which lots of kids do, and you have a PS4, which most kids do, like, you can essentially become like an amateur filmmaker, and you won't be behind on the current technology. Like, that's the one big thing that, like, I think is really cool about being able to I think he called it democratize that technology, is that like you're not starting 100 steps behind. You're not like going from getting a 8mm camera and having to figure out like what they're doing now. You can essentially start where the professionals are, and you can build from there, which I think is really cool.
And it's similar to it's that way with quote unquote real cameras now, where, you know, $1,000 DSLR now shoots video that a $20,000 digital camera 10 years ago could only dream of.
Right.
But there is still that gap of like, oh, there's the Red and the Alexas of the world where you shoot really high end stuff, and then there's like there's kids with their DSLRs.
Right.
This stuff in particular, you're right. It's and the guy's name is Gershish. I'm gonna fuck up his last name. It's a very long last name, but
we'll tweet it.
Yeah, we'll tweet it out. I mean, you guys are both right in that. Yeah, it's way more democratized, and because it's all so very new, and it was driven by not necessarily consumer level technologies, but definitely high. I mean, they're using video cards and computer systems that the nerdiest of nerds and hardcore gamers are also using.
Right.
Just for 4 different reasons, but based out of the same technological challenges. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it is democratized, and it is like a kid with a PS4 and an iPad now and enough time to sit and do it could render out something that feels like that Final Fantasy movie of 10 decades ago, which seemed like an insane. I remember when I first saw that as a kid, I thought that was insane. I was like, holy shit, this like looks real, but it's not real.
Yeah.
Like, they're flipping around and just like, and now it's just like a kid with Cinema 4D and way too much time on his hands could do this, could animate the exact kind of stuff and put it out there on their own. And it's not that much different from what ILM is doing with the Avengers.
Right? Yeah.
You know?
And like, I think that like you bring up Final Fantasy, the spirits within.
Yeah.
But also like Final Fantasy Advent Children, which was the kind of sequel to Final Fantasy VII, which is also kind of utilizing that technology. They're able to use like insane angles and do a lot of cool stuff, which is I think that is what I really am excited to get to, the point where we can have a lot of photorealistic action that utilizes these vertical angles that you couldn't get without a human being like laying on their back and getting stepped in their face. Right. Because like I watch a lot of anime, and they are able to, because they're using animation, utilize these really amazing angles. Like Musashi Kishimoto, who did the Naruto series, when in the end of the first series, there is a fight between two of the main characters, and he's able to essentially get a shot where it is underneath the water looking up, and you see all the ripples of them standing on the water, and then he is able to essentially dolly up from there into the regular view, and you see the reflections. And that's not a shot that you can get non-virtually, because one, you disrupt the water and it would ruin the whole shot.
Right.
But also like you can't have these people standing on water. And so I'm excited for the time that we are able to get to the point where we can do that. And I think we get a little bit of that in Alita Battle Angel.
Yeah. I'm interested to see that movie.
Yeah.
Because that's another one that's very based on a lot of these technologies.
Mm-hmm. And that one is a very, like, Jungle Book, there's one human character.
Right.
And the rest you can just throw, it's all virtual worlds. But Alita is a mix between, like, real environments and virtual environments, and real characters and virtual characters. So like I'm really interested to see like how it manages to marry those two things, because it's the closest thing to what I want, which is balls to the wall action but in live action.
Right? Yeah.
I'm trying to think, do you guys remember, what is it, Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow?
Yeah.
That was the first time I really remember people making a big deal about, no, it's real actors, but entirely CG environments.
Yeah.
And I remember that movie came out and didn't really make that much of a splash, and now that's so far beyond the norm. Now that's what half of the big movies do front to back.
Yeah. And I also, like, with that in mind, like, I remember everyone giving George Lucas shit because, like, all the prequels were just, like, these fake background environments, but now it's hot shit because we can do it more photorealistically, and it doesn't feel like these characters are in front of a green screen or a blue screen. Because what is that guy's name who did the Jungle Book? Because I'm just gonna keep saying Jungle Book Man. Jungle Book Man, was talking about how, like,
Rob Legato is the visual effects supervisor. Yeah.
So Rob Legato was talking about how all the different elements have to feel like they exist in the same realm. So like the issue that we had in the prequels, I guess, which is why a lot of shit was given, is that like the environments felt fabricated and the people felt real, and our brains couldn't necessarily marry the two. But now we're able to create those environments and those large scale virtual places that have that photorealistic feel, that feel tactile, that like now we're able to have the actors actually like feel like they can touch and exist in that environment.
Well, did you guys see Iron Man? Or not Iron Man, Aquaman?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a great example of that marriage as well. When you look at all the underwater battle scenes, and especially the underwater, like, gladiator sequence thing. I forget what they called it. The Ring of Fire? Was that it?
That's what it was.
Yeah. I was tripping out. I was like, how's there a Ring of Fire underwater? But it's interesting how they approach shooting stuff like that, because it is a lot of real camera, but real time, some sense of the environment's happening. But then when you start to do that, you start to think even more in depth. And I mean, that's a campy feel good movie, but I thought it was really great cinematography because and production design, because when you are able, as you're shooting, as a creator, as a director, as a cinematographer, as a production designer, to look at things as if you're in this environment that you're fabricating, and not just look at pieces that you're going to remove and replace however many months or weeks down the road. You're going to start to think about things differently. And what I really loved was everyone in that movie was on wires and blown about in ways that you felt their weightlessness underwater. Like, it seemed like they did they're very careful to show that very well, even when there's an explosion happening, or Aquaman moves like a torpedo underwater, but like, what does a torpedo moving look like? Actually feel like, how do we show speed in an environment where speed is also reduced, relatively visually reduced, and like that's really cool. It's like that, and that's what I mean, where this is happening all the time, and we're already in the virtual cinematography age. We're not fully immersed in it to the point where we're still not 100% animating everything. The Lion King is the first thing I can think of where it's a complete animation. It's Pixar, like, in that sense, but there's going to be a filmmaking, from a filmmaking standpoint, there's going to be a distinction that makes it a live action movie somehow, and not an animated film. Because even like WALL-E looked fucking gorgeous, right? And there are animated films that look great, but you're still like, it's an animated film. Whereas something about even that trailer, it's like something about the Lion King, it's like it's all animated, but it's not an animated film. There's something about it where it's like, this is a live action film,
right? Like, you're hearing people refer to it as such, but technically it isn't.
It's
technically,
an animation.
it's a photorealistically animated movie, but that takes us all the way back to, we're progressing to a point where these total fabrications are going to be increasingly indistinguishable from reality. And what does that mean as far as how we engage with media, how we engage with the world, how we engage with other people, how we engage with ourselves even? Fascinating time to be alive. Like, we're very much like, are you guys ever just take a step back and become consciously aware of the fact that we are more or less an in-between generation, right? Like, you were talking before about how the world is very much changing, and we are the last generation, I think, that will remember how it was before. And so, going forward, what is reality going to mean? What is truth going to mean? We're already seeing, before these technologies become consumer accessible affordably, we're already seeing the concepts of truth and reality attacked and eroded. So really, what does happen to the way we engage in toto once these things become an everyday part of our lives?
Guys, we're out of time. I know. But this has been a really fascinating conversation. Like, I feel like I'm going to be thinking about this for the next few days.
What I'm really looking forward to is the little window before it all collapses, where every character in every movie has an emoting helmet, like Patrick Wilson in Aquaman. That helmet, no joke, that helmet is my pick for best movie of 2018. Not Aquaman, but specifically his emoting helmet. So I'm looking forward to the little window between now and total societal collapse, this beautiful oasis of time where it's like, if Yorgos Lanthimos is going to go make The Favorite, they're all going to have CG emoting helmets and whatnot. Everything's going to go bug-eyed, and it's going to be amazing. And then you really got to appreciate it while it's happening, because once it's over...
That's
a big tech buzz.
Matt, where can people find you if they want to talk to you more about virtual cinematography?
You can find me on Instagram at wrongmattsmith.
Okay, where does that name come from?
So, so my idea of it was, my name is Matt Smith, which is very generic, and if you just search Matt Smith, you're not going to find me, generally speaking, unless we have tons of mutual friends in common already or something like that. You're not really going to find me. So my idea, you're always going to find a wrong Matt Smith. So my idea was to be the wrong Matt Smith.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that has something to do with Doctor Who. which I've never seen an episode of Doctor Who in my life.
Yeah. You should change that, but I get it.
I missed the boat. I missed the boat, man. I don't know.
It's over.
Yeah, it's
I can never enjoy it ever.
It's over. It's over for me. But I also made that name while Matt Smith was the current Doctor.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who are like, oh, it's a... And I'm like, I don't know. Yeah. I have seen 8 episodes of Doctor Who.
Okay. You
David
don't have to
Tennant
justify
was-
yourself to me.
It's just, yeah.
It's great. Lex, where can they find you?
Where can they? I am on Twitter and Instagram at the Lex Michael.
Awesome. And you can find me at Tauri J, Taurijay. But you can find this podcast at Missing Outcast. That's both on Instagram and Twitter.
I do miss Outcast.
Yeah, bruh. Oh, yeah.
It's a good double. Yeah.
But also make sure that if you have a chance and you love what we're doing, go onto iTunes, leave us a rating or a review or both. It just helps other people find the show. It helps people who like things to find things that they like, which is the show. So please do that. That would be a great mitzvah for us. If you leave us a rating, we will, or a review, we will read it here on the show. So if that helps incentivize you, bro, do that shit. Once again, thank you, Matt. We enjoyed having you again. We hope you enjoyed playing golf. You like doing that, right? What else do old white people like to do?
That tripped me out for a second. I am going to go play golf for the first time, actually, pretty soon, yeah.
Yeah.
But I like IPAs.
Cool.
And I'm gonna leave it there.
What was the other one? I think the other one was rock climbing.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
rock climb a lot. Yeah, all the things that middle-aged white men do.
Yeah, great. Well, keep people posted on all those fun things on your Instagram, which is, again, Wrong Matt Smith. Thank you guys for listening, and we hope you have a wonderful week. This has been the retrospective that is introspective.
And now you have a new perspective. It rhymes, so it's super cute. We got to put a beat under it.
Hell yeah.
And just say it like 7 or 8 times.
Dude. Retrospective. Introspective.
Oh, they're actually committing to this.
Retrospective.
Oh, I can't.
Introspective.
You just fade this out at the end.
A new perspective.
Did you know a turkey puppet once ran for the presidency of Ireland? Did you know that meat once rained from the skies of Kentucky? Did you know that there was an emperor of the United States for a while? Then listen to the Wiki Ship Down podcast.
We live in an age when the sum total of humanity's knowledge can be found in your pocket on a smartphone at any given time. But when that knowledge is peer editable, like it is on Wikipedia, what does that say about mankind? So follow us down the digital rabbit hole as we drink, joke, and curse our way through the random button on Wikipedia and see where our journey through humanity's knowledge takes us.
While you're at it, follow us on all social media at Wiki Ship Down. I'm Ruth Ann.
I'm Ryan, and be sure to find us every Wednesday on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to podcasts.